Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast, where we explore the heart of entrepreneurship and the vital role small businesses play in our economy. Today's episode really dives into branding, which is a crucial aspect that can set your business apart in a competitive market. Understanding how to effectively communicate your brand story can lead to remarkable growth and connection with your audience. Today, we are very excited to welcome our guest, Jared Henriques, the founder of Renga, a brand strategy and design studio. With a passion for helping brands articulate their unique stories, Jared's expertise lies in strategy, copy, and design. He is unsatiably curious and collaborates closely with clients to create compelling narratives that resonate deeply. Join us in welcoming Jared to the podcast. Jared, we are so honored to have you on the show. How are you today?
Doing really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Very pleased to have you with us and very excited to share your insights on branding and storytelling. Now, to kick off today's conversation, Jared, branding is often one of the first steps a business needs to take to ensure success, and it's
Mhm.
usually not just about a logo or a catchy tagline. It's the very essence of how a business connects with its audience. Can you please
Mhm.
share why branding is so essential for the small businesses today?
Yeah, I think it's important to even define brand. And the way that I would define it is your brand is simply how you are perceived. And I think when we understand that that's the definition, we're realizing that branding's happening whether you're trying to or not. And so for me, I would say good branding is when your intention matches that perception, right? And I think that's where so many businesses don't necessarily take the time to really create an intentional understanding of what they are trying to communicate. Having clarity on who you are and how you want to come across is such an important part in business. And, in the early stages, there's you can definitely get a little too in your own head and forget that you need to find product market fit and do some of all those other things. But it's really how you want to come across to your audience and your customers and as well as your employees.
Well, that's a very powerful perspective, Jared. You're right. I mean, it's fascinating to see how a strong brand can foster loyalty and trust among customers. Now, in your experience, what are some common mistakes that small businesses make with their branding?
Mm. I think it's allowing the customers to determine the brand, right? We call our process brand therapy, and it feels like that in a lot of ways. And you don't go to therapy to find out how to win the most amount of friends, but rather to determine who are the right people to have in your lives. And those people are the ones that allow you to be the truest representation of yourself. And I think it's very similar within branding a business is you want to really have that rootedness in your own identity. Who am I and how do I show up? And then how do I attract the right people, the right customers to come through? And so I think a lot of people get so focused on adapting and adjusting their brand personality for all of their customers that they lose sight of who they are. And very similarly to how we sometimes do as people.
No, those insights are incredibly valuable, Jared. And on that note, I'd really like to connect with our listeners here. Now, listeners, as you think about your own branding, please remember that clarity and consistency are key. So please take the time to define your brand's missions and values as they are the foundation
Mm,
of your messaging. Now, Jared, now that we've understood the importance of branding, let's explore how effective storytelling can elevate that brand
mm,
even further because storytelling has become a buzzword in the business world, but it's
yeah.
truly an art form that can
Mhm.
distinguish brands in a crowded marketplace. And, I feel like a compelling story can really evoke emotion and connection, turning casual customers into loyal advocates.
Mhm.
How can small businesses leverage storytelling to enhance their brand presence?
Yeah, I think if we continue on that analogy of brand therapy and we talked about self-awareness, so understanding who you are, then there's the social awareness, right? Understanding your customers, understanding what makes them tick, and understanding who else are vying for their attention, right? So once you have that rootedness in who you are and the social awareness of understanding your audience and the environment that they exist within, everything then becomes communication, right? It's how do I best communicate and express my intentions to this audience so that it is received well? I think brands kind of do the one or the other, right? They go completely in market research and A/B test and just completely tailor their marketing to that social awareness, and they lose sight of who they are. Or they do the opposite of this is who we are. If you like us, you like us. If you don't, you don't, and you just shout into the void without any sense of feedback or compassion or empathy. And I think it's when you really find that balance, the answer is storytelling in that, right? The way that we communicate has to come from a place that is authentic to who we are, with a communication style and a message and a tone that is right for the audience that we're trying to communicate to. So I think, yeah, storytelling can definitely be a buzzword, but it's always been effective. It's how humans communicate with each other. We much prefer to, and we resonate and understand story way more than we do facts and data. And so the more that we're able to find those kind of key elements in the benefits that our business provides and the pain that it alleviates for our customers, and the way that we are different within the environment, the way that we can craft those narratives is what really creates compelling marketing and brand content.
It's interesting to see how a well-crafted story can transform a brand's identity because it really speaks to the importance of authenticity in branding. Um, Jared, what are the practical tips? What are some practical tips that you would like to give to businesses looking to improve their storytelling approach?
Mm. I think it's I think one of the practical tips is just making sure that, we all have those aunts or uncles where we try to explain what we do, and it kind of feels like we're just speaking different languages. And I think to actually take the time to try and distill what we do into a form that anybody can understand is so important. I think often we start to say, okay, they just don't get it. And we don't adjust our approach to communication. We just keep shouting and hoping that people adapt their comprehension to the way that we are communicating. And so I think it's about continuing to test, continuing to explore. And I think, like, really, when we're talking about branding, it's not a one and done thing. It is this perpetual practice of coming back and saying, what am I trying to communicate? Who am I trying to communicate it to? Are my intentions best reflected within my communications? Is the way that I am talking to my customers, is the way that I am building my product, is the way that I am structuring my offerings reflective of who it is that I want to be coming across as? And so I think it's taking those that ongoing approach to that repeated self-reflection and honest evaluation of how we're communicating our business.
Well, that's fantastic advice, Jared. No, thank you so much for also highlighting the essential role that authenticity plays in branding. And listeners, remember that every brand has a story to tell. So please don't shy away from sharing yours, because as engaging as a storytelling can be, it can really turn your audience into your biggest supporters. Now, Jared, let's dive into the technical aspects of branding, specifically
Mhm,
focusing on the creation of effective pitch decks, because pitch decks are essential tools
mm,
nowadays for conveying a business's vision and value, and a well-designed pitch deck can make a significant difference in attracting investors or even clients. And it's really an art that combines design and
mhm.
storytelling. So what are the key elements of a successful pitch deck that every small business should consider?
Yeah, I think, it's pretty atypical for a branding studio like us to do investor pitch decks, but it's one of my favorite things because the storytelling is the most important component. I think founders get so caught up in the details, and it's really hard to see the forest through the trees when you fall in love with all of the little minutia of your own business. And that's where, you your pitch deck is often far too detailed and far too much content. Of the few hundred I've done, I don't think I've ever added content to a deck that I've received. It's always about trying to find those common threads and pulling back. And I think my underlying philosophy of a pitch deck is the goal is not actually to win investment, but it's a filtering exercise. And so I like to frame a good pitch deck as like a first date. The goal of the first date is not to get married at the end of it, but to actually book a second date. And what you're trying to do in that first date is communicate who you are, what you care about, and what you're trying to accomplish. And the investors that resonate with that will be the ones that you want. You want quick no's. You don't want the long dragged on, oh, I'm not really sure what they do. I'm a little unclear. Okay, I'll just keep stringing this along until I have that clarity. You want fast no's and excited second dates. And so that's really the goal of a pitch deck, is to write it from top to bottom in one complete thought. Like, headlines are the only thing that someone's going to read. So if you just look at your pitch deck and you go read your headlines top to bottom, does that feel like one cohesive story? That's always the first way that we go through, is that elevator pitch really captured in there, right? That's usually how it goes. And then the supporting content is something you can add in after, but you have to appreciate that you're unlikely to read the bullet point 3 of a pitch deck that you've received, and the investors are going to be the same, right? So don't allow design or the details to derail the overall narrative of really communicating who you are and what you're trying to accomplish.
Very insightful. And it's clear that pitch deck isn't just about the content, but how the content is presented to make a lasting impression. Next, let's explore ways small businesses can incorporate branding into their daily activities to strengthen their market presence and engage customers effectively. Based on this point, Jerry, what are some actionable steps that small business owners can take to integrate effective branding into their marketing strategies?
Yeah, I think it's actually getting a lot less romantic about the tactics and really prioritizing the constant iterations and attempts to communicate, right? And so whether you're using, different graphic tools to communicate, I think the goal is to um, continue to try and push and connect with your people, find your people. The only way that you're going to refine the storytelling skill set is through iterations and through practice and through running through this pitch over and over and over again and finding what resonates and finding what doesn't. I think so often we can be perfectionists in our communication and our copy, and at the end of the day, if you are just keeping it all internal and you're not actually testing it with other people, you put far too much or and weight into that one creative asset. And so I think it's just a practice of reps, honestly. And I think it's constantly asking, is this how I want? Is this accurately representing how we want to come across, or what is the intention behind this piece of content, right? And as we're doing all of those pieces of content, is it, hey, we're hopping on a trend and it's just a me too, or is it actually something that we want our brand to be known for as we move forward? And so I think it's simultaneously holding yourself to a higher standard, but putting less expectation on each piece of content. So it's having that standard of representing yourself well, but having the humility and willingness to just continue to put up the reps moving forward.
Those are some actionable insights. And you're right. Small adjustments can lead to significant changes in a brand's impact. And to help with that, we'd love to, hear more about some of the tools or resources that you would like to recommend to our small businesses that are looking to enhance their branding efforts.
Mm. Yeah, I think like it's so tricky. I mean, I have no shortage of a whole bunch of tools, but I I find the tools that I use work for me. I don't think there's too much magic or in those tools. I think it's about continuing to absorb content that gives you different perspectives. My underlying belief about creativity is that creativity is just connecting different things, right? And so the more that we absorb the diversity of the inputs that we have, unlock new and potential pathways for connection and creativity. And so I think like whether it's books or podcasts or sources of inspiration, I think it's to be a constant and perpetual student of absorbing those different components and then continuing to experiment and play and move forward. And so whether you're using Canva, whether you're using Figma, whether you're using the Adobe suite, whether you're using Midjourney and AI to kind of play with you, I think all of these things are tools in us helping explore and connect
Mhm.
concepts. And the only way for us to get the most out of these tools is to increase our service area for potential connections.
Well, thank you for those recommendations. They all are great. Now, moving forward, let's discuss the future of branding and how businesses can stay ahead of the curve. Because as the business landscape evolves, so do branding strategies, and staying ahead requires
Mm.
adaptation and innovation. So, let's discuss what the future might hold for branding, especially for small businesses. Jared, what trends are you seeing or foresee shaping the future of branding for small businesses in the next few years?
Mm. I think like the trend that I'm seeing that I think will continue is people are connecting with other people. I think that seems really broad, but the reality is so often people would put a lot of their identity into their brands, right? The brands that people connect with and fall in love with are the ones that they make a part of their identity. I wear this brand because this is representative of who I want to be. I, eat from this restaurant because this is representative of my identity. I think a lot of it are little micro expressions of our identity. And as we're seeing the increase of content, people are more and more connecting with the human beings behind the businesses and the brands, that the founder brand is actually becoming almost more important than the corporate brand in a lot of different ways. And you're seeing, whether it's, your Kylie Jenners or your Dan Martells or your Gary Vaynerchuk's or whatever of those, like their personal audiences are actually bigger than their business audiences. And I think like that incredibly intentional, right? I think this is a practice to say, I am who I am. This current version of my business might not be around in 50 years, but I'm still going to be me in 50 years. And so I'm going to pay a lot of attention to build the trust and the affinity with who I am, because that will then translate not only to my current businesses, but any future businesses as well. And so I think it's about, as scary as it is to say like everybody's going to become a personal brand, like I think there is a sense of truth in that. I think where I've seen the darkness of that is when people can no longer differentiate between the identity of their personal brand and who they are at home unplugged, and they become that perpetual forever online person in their day-to-day lives. And so I think it's about understanding and appreciating that you can separate those two things, but really being intentional with how you're presenting yourself.
Well, that's a very fascinating outlook because the evolution of branding is something that every business should pay attention to as they plan for the future. Um, Jared, how can small businesses prepare for these upcoming trends that you just highlighted?
I think it's adopting long-term thinking, right? I think it's about ensuring that you have a rootedness in who you are and where you want to go, and not allowing those trends to cause you to compromise those things. I think it's so common for founders to start a business, which is really hard. It's so hard to start a business. And you go on this effort to start something. And then 3 to 5 years after you are just chasing short term win after short term win after short term win, you're no longer proud of the business that you started. You've been so focused on just trying to get that next step and that next piece of traction that you forgot to remember why you started this thing in the first place. And I think like really to stay rooted in that purpose of your business is going to be the most impactful and important thing when it comes to evaluating these trends, because you'll know when a trend is something that you should capitalize on or it's something you should just leave because it's not for you. I think we feel a pressure to participate in every trend, and that's where burnout really happens.
Thank you for those insights, Jared. Now, before we let you go, let's wrap up our discussion with a final question that really encapsulates our entire conversation today. Jared, if you could leave our listeners with one key takeaway regarding branding and storytelling, what would it be?
Mm, yeah, I think it's like it's a combination of finding your purpose and then understanding where you end and your business begins, right? So often in small businesses, their identity becomes the brand identity of the startup. And this really can limit your ability to recruit and retain proper talent because you become so overprotective of every single thing that comes out of your business. Understandably, it's your baby, but by documenting, doing that deep work of documenting who this business is, you are able to allow other people to come in and craft that story and carry that story and limit the pressure that you have as a human being to adapt and evolve, because the business is going to adapt and evolve and you are going to adapt and evolve. And when you put the pressure that those two things have to be in the same way, that's when a lot of founders actually end up blowing up their business because they want to evolve and change personally and they feel that it's required for their business to do the same. And I don't think it is. What is important is to write it all down and get clear and invite other people into continuing that story and participate in that evolution.
Mhm. Well, this is great, Jared. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise on branding. I'm pretty sure your insights will undoubtedly help our listeners elevate their business narratives. Again, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And listeners, that was the end of our discussion with Jared Henriques, the founder of Renga, about the importance of branding, effective storytelling, and the future of branding for small businesses. Jared shared a lot. He shared invaluable insights that can help entrepreneurs really strengthen their brand presence and connect more authentically with their audiences. Again, we'd like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our partners, RBC, UPS, Constant Contact, IAG, and Google for their invaluable support in making this podcast possible. Please be sure to visit our website, CanadianSME.ca, to subscribe to the magazine for such insightful content. Again, join us next time for another enlightening discussion. Until then, thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.